Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Sipe Society live lesson room. Hope you're having a great day. I know that we are. Today we'll be talking about the children of the United States Civil War. Before we get into that, I want to make sure you know how to use the room around you. Over here on my left, we've got web links. Now, I'll be using these web links throughout the session today. And if you're watching the full function recording, not the YouTube recording, it should be pretty simple for you to just kick back and have me open the links. Right now, I'm opening a link. I'll go ahead and get my logo out of the way here. And we'll share the screen so you can see what's actually going on my main screen. I've got the Sipe Society newsletter / mailing list sign up available there. Be sure to sign up if you haven't done so already. This is how I keep you abreast of the latest and greatest free resources from SipeSociety.com. But really what I'm doing here is I'm demonstrating just some of the features that we have in the room. Of course, we can share music like I did with the Mr. and Smith Dark Country Road instrumental. It is from the Free Music Archive. If you've never checked that out, I highly recommend it. We can share screens. We can even do things like bring out a poll pod and ask questions, which is what we'll do here in just a second when we get underway with our first selection for today. So, the subject, children of the Civil War. Like so many things, this is not a single experience. There wasn't a single pattern that childhood followed throughout the North and South. So with that much in mind, we're going to explore a total of 5 different profiles or 5 different types of experiences that might have been had by children during the United States Civil War. We're going to talk about children soldiers, most notably drummer boys in this case. We'll examine the case of the youngest Civil War soldier to serve, an 8-year-old kid from Indianapolis. We'll also talk about a 16-year-old drummer boy originally from Georgia, but enlisted in Louisiana, who lost his life during the war, but became kind of an iconic representation of the Civil War. Next thing we'll talk about is children on the home front. We take a look at some of the resources that Union children had as far as readers, and we compared those to the materials, the media that was available for Confederate children down south. Pretty interesting comparison there. And then we wrap up with a couple of audio clips of former slaves recalling their time as children during the days of slavery and the Civil War. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump in. I'll ask you to consider this question. I'll juggle this around a little bit while we're sharing and stuff. But what kind of source is Edward Black's drum? What kind of source is Edward Black's drum? Let me go ahead and open up our resource. Again, this should be popping up in your computer screen. If it isn't, just go over here to the left, check Edward Black drum, and you can click browse to, and that'll take you right there. Of course, you can just follow around along in the share screen as well. Okay. Now, legally, you were supposed to be at least 18 years old to enlist in the Union Army. But many younger folks managed to enlist by simply lying or misleading. There was another way to get around this for even younger children, though, and that was to serve in a non-combat role, most notably as a drummer boy. There were some other roles that you saw young kids serving in, and this even goes back to the American Revolution and earlier times, like, for example, being a powder monkey. Children were really suited to run powder to and from the cannons on a warship because they were short enough to not be seen over the ship's rail. Dangerous, yes. Many children died doing this type of thing. And as we'll learn, children died during the Civil War in their role even as a drummer boy. When you think about it, the drummer boy was often at the front of the attack, so pretty dangerous job. Okay. We came across this, as I was doing some research again, I wanted to kind of provide some examples. Edward Black was from Indianapolis, and he enlists in 1861. He is actually taken prisoner during the course of the war and ends up in on Ship Island in the Gulf of Mexico. When New Orleans is liberated by the Union troops, he is released and goes back to Indianapolis. But he manages to enlist again in a more combat role and did serve with his side by side with his father until the end of the war. Now, his actual drum, I think this is kind of interesting. We'll take a look. Here's a embellished photograph. This is an actual picture of Edward Black, an actual photo of him. It's been colorized. But what I think is interesting, you can look at this drum, and you can see it's got these leather tags. And then when we look at the next image, which is the actual drum that Mr. Black carried during the Civil War, we've got the tags. I think it's kind of interesting because they even see the snare, the series of lines that gives it that springy kind of tat-tat-tat-tat sound. Still intact. If you'd like to see this particular artifact, you can visit the Indianapolis Children's Museum here in Indianapolis, Indiana, or you can just check out the link that I passed your way. So, let me pass along another resource or two while you contemplate the question: what kind of source is this drum? Is it primary or secondary? Primary or secondary? Now, while you're thinking about that, I want to tell you a little more about the story, and it is sad. Edward did survive the war, but died shortly after his 8th birthday. In my research, I wasn't able to find many details about his death other than the fact that it was related to his time as a soldier. Was it injuries? Was it a psychological issue? Was it addiction like alcoholism or even addiction to morphine and other opiates, which had been introduced during the Civil War to fight pain? I don't know. With some additional research, I'm confident that we could find these answers out. And like so much of history, we like to leave some of those questions. And this might be something that you could pursue as part of a history project or to learn more. Find out the details of what happened to Edward Black and why his life specifically ended so early. Now, I do have another resource here before we examine the question, what kind of source is Edward Black? Letters of a Drummer Boy. This is from the Indiana Magazine of History. And this is an article that was written, I want to say, about 4 years ago. Oh, my fault. Make that 1938. I guess I was off by nearly a century. In any case, Letters of a Drummer Boy. This is a series of letters that were collected and edited and passed along. None of them are from Edward Black, but they are from other Indiana boys who went to war and served as drummer boys. And we actually have some very interesting letters and diary entries. I particularly like this last one. Henry Burt writes to his sister a series of letters. And it's fascinating because we actually learn about, for example, the occupation of Mobile, Alabama. I have family in Mobile, and it's kind of weird to think of an Indiana drummer boy as part of an occupying force in Alabama, where I go to the beach about once a year. So very interesting stuff. Primary sources for you to investigate. So let's take a look at this. What kind of source is the drum? Is it primary or secondary? And just to clarify, a primary source is something that is directly tied to the event, the subject of research. It's directly tied to it. It's an artifact that was there. It's a first-hand account. It's a photograph. It is a person who can tell you about what has been there. A secondary source, well, I'm a secondary source. Today, if you wanted to use any portion of this lesson, you would have to say, Mr. Sipe says that this happened and this happened relevant to the Civil War. I am offering my interpretation, my analysis. A textbook oftentimes is a secondary source, but there might be a photo in that textbook of a battlefield. That's a primary source. But for our purposes today, Edward Black's drum is a primary source, And that's what historians love. Look, we like it when you go out and you read a book and you find some information and you provide a decent citation to where you find that information. That's great. History teachers, historians, we love primary sources though. And that's one of the beautiful things about the internet is that it gives us the means to access primary sources. And that's what we'll be utilizing today largely. There's a couple of examples and we'll point that out. So Edward Black, the youngest Union soldier, enlists when he's 8 years old, eventually leaves the service but comes back after being taken prisoner, and ultimately leaves this earth at a young age, presumably because of his actions in the United States Civil War. Now, up next, we're going to take a look at Edwin Jemison. Edwin Jemison, let's go ahead and browse. So I'm going to use a Prezi that was created by presumably another student to kind of give you the basics about Edwin Francis Jemison. He was 16 years old when he enlists in Louisiana. He's actually from Georgia, but his family had recently moved there. He enlists and becomes a drummer boy for, I forget the exact regiment, but one of the Louisiana regiments. Photograph is produced. He actually comes from a pretty established, if not wealthy, family. He does have relatives who were political figures, teachers, professionals, so on and so forth. But his fame and his impact really comes in depth. Let's go ahead and jump in and fill you in. Edwin Jemison. Now take a look at this image. Private Edwin Jemison's picture has been publicized probably more so than any other enlisted soldier of the Civil War. Now, of course, we've seen General Lee and General Grant. We see those kind of images all the time. But this particular picture, and it comes from the Library of Congress. I'll just go ahead and do a quick, show you how we do this, loc.gov. And I need to do a quick search of Edwin Jemison. And this portrait right here, it was initially discovered about, I want to say in the 1950s, and it started to be used in textbooks and this type of thing. But there's something about this particular image that people really identify with. Maybe it's the youth. Maybe it's the expression on his face. But for whatever reason, this photograph has become one of the most enduring images out of the United States Civil War. Let's learn a little bit about the young man behind this image. So, not that much different from a lot of folks who fought in the Civil War. He was 16 years old and enlisted, and he was 16 when this photo was taken. Before he was in the war, like I mentioned, his family had just moved to Louisiana from Georgia. He did have two siblings, and I'm not sure exactly what happened to them, if they fought in the war, if they survived, but that information is definitely out there. But pretty much so an average teenager prior to the outbreak of the Civil War. Now, the biggest thing that separates him from the others is the photograph and the impact it's had. It's even been used in advertisements. I thought that was kind of interesting that it had been used as such. Edwin dies at Malvern Hill, and at the time of his death, this actually becomes, it is publicized, but he is decapitated by a cannonball. And when his body is discovered, it seems especially tragic that such a young man would lose his life in such a horrific way. Again, folks, keep in mind, we're talking about he was 17 when he lost his life. Many of the middle school and high school students that this lesson is intended for are 14 to 18 years old. Imagine being your age and facing war, trying to avoid out-and-out combat by being a drummer boy, but you still lose your life, and in a most unpleasant way. Again, he was hit with a cannonball, and he did die instantly. His family did erect a memorial to him back in their family home in Georgia after the war, but we don't really know if he was buried there. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and bring this question out. Kind of put it in the corner here. Where is Edwin Jemison buried? We really don't know. Most likely, the general consensus is that he was buried in a mass grave or an unmarked grave there at Malvern Hill. Now, it is possible, and many people did this during the course of the Civil War. We know he was buried there at Malvern Hill, but it is quite possible that his family or friends had him disinterred. In other words, they dug up the remains and then put him on a freight car to send him to be buried. But we're not really certain. If you'd like to learn more about this, I'm going to go ahead and open up the Malvern Hill article that tells us a little bit about the battle where Edwin lost his life. There's also a video clip in here that's put on by the U.S. National Park Service, Ashley Whitehead gives us a discussion of that. I'll leave that for you to play on your own time. But again, another great resource to learn more about the life of a Confederate child soldier from the United States Civil War. Now, to answer the question, where is Edwin Jemison buried? I really bring this out. We don't know. So ultimately, it's uncertain. But this is a great debate. People continue to discuss this to this day. And if you do some Google searching and you follow some of the links that you'll find in the articles I've shared today, you're going to see that this is actually a topic that historians and people who are simply interested in history are continuing to discuss here in 2016, 2017. Okay, so we've seen the experience of the drummer boys in the Civil War. We see the experience of an 8-year-old from Indianapolis and the experience of a 16-year-old who is from Georgia but enlists Louisiana. Neither one ends well. In the case of Edward Black, he does survive the war, but dies at a young age, apparently because of the wounds that he suffered during the war. Mentally, physically, we're not sure. Then we examine Edwin Jemison, who does not survive the war, but achieves a level of fame, achieves an impact in death that probably would not have been realized had he survived the war. Again, if you want to learn more about those, just check out the resources over here in Web Links 11 and read a little more in depth. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's take a look at children on the home front. Now, I want to specify that back on the home front, there was no single experience. Childhood was much different than what we know here in the 21st century. It was harder. It was rougher. You were more likely to die as a child from disease, accidents, any number of things. One of the other things to keep in mind is that there was a vast gulf between classes. The experiences of a poor farmer in rural Indiana are going to be much different than the child of a wealthy merchant, say, in New York City. Likewise, from the South, the child of a poor white Southerner is going to have a much different experience than the privileged child of a plantation owner. So the examples that I'm providing you are just that, examples. This is not an example of what every child experienced. In fact, because both of the examples I'm providing today have to do with magazines and literature that would have been available for children, chances are you had to be a little bit richer to have access to these resources. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these. Let's see here. Our Young Folks, January 1865. I did find this on archive.org. If you've never visited archive.org, I highly recommend it. They have everything from old radio plays. They have pretty much every live performance of the Grateful Dead. They have old magazines, old books, and it is a great place to learn more. Now, Our Young Folks was an illustrated magazine, one of several that were available during the 1850s, 1860s, even after the war through the 1870s. These were produced in a different time. Much simpler, much more direct. You do see some illustrations, but not a lot. Let's take a quick look inside and see what we can find from Our Young Folks. That was came out of Boston in January of 1965. Let me zoom this out a little bit. Now, we kick things off with a story called Hum, the Son of Buzz. It's an interesting story. I haven't got to read the whole thing. It tells the story of a girl who's on vacation and finds a wounded hummingbird and nurses it back to health. Now, what I thought was really interesting, I like the illustration there of the little hummingbird enjoying some nectar on a cup. But I think what is most interesting about this story is the author, Mrs. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Noted abolitionist, but I think it is really cool finding something written by a well-known writer, finding something that we usually would expect to be fiery and full of anti-slavery messages. It's actually a pretty simple story made for children. I don't know exactly. I haven't read a lot of Harriet Beecher Stowe. Everybody's got to pay the bills, though. And I have a feeling that this was probably a reasonable way to do that. Now, we've got many things in here. I'm going to come back to the Volunteers Thanksgiving in just a moment and read a little bit of that. We have an old Finnish fairy tale, basically, called Thumbling. I think many of you have probably come across variations of this story over the years. We have a story of the Redcoats, and I believe this was part of, it's either part of the story from the American Revolution. We have the Color Bearer, and this is tying into that Civil War, storyline. The Little Prisoner, that was talk of, that is a story of a young child who was taken prisoner during a Civil War battle. Now let's go back here and read a little bit from the Thanksgiving. I think this one is interesting because I was always kind of under the impression that our concept of Thanksgiving doesn't really come along until well after the Civil War. There's a little bit of a contradiction to that. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the first page. Before I do, I want you to think about this question, though. In the Volunteers Thanksgiving, what's on the menu for the writer? What does our writer get to eat? All right, here we go. The last days of November, and everything so green. A finer bit of country my eyes have never seen. 'Twill be a thing to tell of 10 years or 20 years hence, how I came down to Georgia at Uncle Sam's expense. 4 years ago this winter, up at the district school, I rode all day and ciphered, perched on a white pine stool, and studied in my atlas the boundaries of the states, and learnt the wars with England, the history, and the dates. Then little I expected to travel in such haste, along the lines my finger and fancy often traced, to bear a soldier's knapsack, and face the cannon's mouth, and help to save for freedom the lovely perjured South. That red old-fashioned schoolhouse, what winds came sweeping through, its doors from bald Monadnock and from the mountains blue. That slope off south and eastward beyond the Merrimack, O pleasant northern river, your music calls me back, to where the pines are humming the slow notes of their psalm, around a shady farmhouse, half hid within their calm, reflecting in the river a picture not so bright as these verandahed mansions, but yet my heart's delight. They're sitting at the table this clear Thanksgiving noon. I smell the crispy turkey. The pies will come in soon. The golden squares of pumpkin, the flaky rounds of mince, behind the barberry syrups, the cranberry and the quince. Be sure my mouth does water, but then I am content to stay and do the errand on which I have been sent. A soldier mustn't grumble at salt beef and hard tack. We'll have a grand Thanksgiving if ever we get back. So again, you can read on, and it's a pretty interesting poem. Not exactly the most earth-shattering thing. Written by Miss Lucy Larkins, it looks like. Question. What is the menu for the writer? Is he having turkey, pumpkin, cranberry? No, it's hardtack. It's hardtack. But again, hoping and thinking of that turkey dinner in the future when his errand is done down in the land of Georgia. Okay, so this is the kind of reading, this is the kind of media that a northern child might have access to. In the South, it was really quite different, though. They struggled for manufactured goods. Things like ink and paper were at a premium, very difficult to come by, let alone working printing presses or people with the skills to operate those presses. Most of the men who would normally have been engaged in that type of activity have gone off to war. But there were materials created, and some of them very interesting, some of them very telling. Now, this is going to sound like a little bit of a strange question, but I want to go ahead and bring this out. So, history can be changed if it is offensive. Just think about that a little bit. If something happened in the past that we find offensive in our perspective, in the modern perspective, should we rewrite it? Should we cover it up? Should we deny that it ever happened? I mean, there's a lot of things in American history that are embarrassing. that are not positive. We'll just leave it at that. Do we strip them from the history books, or do we accept them and move on? So with that much in mind, I'm going to open up our next resource. I got a couple here from Dixie. I think the geographical reader for Dixie Children is the one I want. Let's open that up and see what we have here. And once again, I like to remind people throughout these sessions, I probably say it to the point where it drives you nuts. If this did not open automatically for you, just go over here and click Geographical Reader for Dixie Children. Now this one here is pretty interesting. It gives you the option of looking at the actual photos of the pages of the book, the scanned images. For our purposes today, let's go ahead and take a look at the HTML file. A little easier to review. Okay. Well, we see the cover. Looks like M.B. Moore was our writer, Mrs. M.B. Moore. This comes out of Raleigh, right there in the heart of the Confederacy. It was published in 1863. The author of this little work, having found most of the juvenile books too complex for young minds, has for some time intended making an effort to simplify the science of geography. I like geography. It's one of the things I'm licensed to teach in the state of Indiana. If she shall succeed in bringing this beautiful and useful study within the grasp of the little folks and making it both interesting and pleasant, her purpose will be fully accomplished. Okay, very good. Lesson 1, we learn what geography means. I wish you to pay good attention. If I use a word you do not understand, you must ask your teacher to explain it to you. Okay, very good. Talk about the seasons and how the earth moves around the sun. Pretty straight up. Land, talk about the proportion of land and the proportion of water covering the surface of the earth. Talks about a little other waters. Hemispheres, the eastern and western hemisphere. Pretty basics. Learning the points of the compass. Interesting that the points of the compass is followed by canals and railroads. But then we learned about latitude and longitude. It seems to me that latitude and longitude would be a little more important than canals and railroads. Okay, we talk a little bit about zones, mostly climate zones. There are no time zones at this point because the railroads haven't been developed, which really warranted the use for standardized time zones. But they do talk about climate zones. Then down here on page 10, things get a little ugly. I'm not going to read this whole thing about racism, and I'll just read a couple of excerpts from it. Again, history is not politically correct, folks, and to try to sanitize it is really dangerous. At least that's what I would say. Let me put the question over here. The men who inhabit the globe are not all alike. Those in Europe and America are mostly white and are called the Caucasian race. This race is civilized and is far above the others. They have schools and churches and live in fine style. They also generally have wise and good men for rulers and a regular form of government. The women are treated with respect and tenderness, and in many cases their wish is law among their male friends. From there it goes on to talk about people of the Asians, white people. Now, I'm going to read a little bit about the Confederate take, or at least this author's take, on folks of African descent. The African or Negro race is found in Africa. They are slothful and vicious, but possess little cunning. They are very cruel to each other, and when they they sell their prisoners to white people for slaves. They know nothing of Jesus, and the climate in Africa is so unhealthy that white men can scarcely go there to preach to them. Slaves who are found in America are in much better condition. They are better fed, better clothed, and better instructed than in their native country. And also goes on to kind of reinforce an old myth about about Africans being descendants of Ham, the cursed son of Noah. There we have it, folks. Again, history is not pretty, but I think it is important, especially when you're using primary sources, to be a little bit objective. In other words, not be quite so judgmental. Understand that, I'm not making excuses. This is not about making judgments, but this was the reality for the South. This is the information that a Southern child was being given if they had access to information at all. I did not go into this, get into this incredibly in depth. It does talk a little bit about the United States versus the Southern Confederacy. Very interesting characterizations of other countries. I thought it was really interesting. I think there's a ton more that you can learn about the life of a Southern child during this. Now, the question at hand, can history can be changed if it is offensive? You can change the recording of history. That much can be manipulated, but the matter of fact cannot be changed. Period. One of the actually in this other book, and I'll give you an example of this in the other Confederate media piece that I have. It's I'm not going to open this up, but it is the Confederate Spelling Book. They put forth one of the greatest myths of our one of our founding fathers, that George Washington cut down a cherry tree with an axe and confessed to his father, "I cannot tell a lie. It was me that cut down the cherry tree." Absolute bunk. Never happened. We've traced this to a book made by, I believe it's called Parson Weems. And that's where we get that Washington could throw a silver dollar across the Potomac and a lot of these myths. But my point is, although you can change the recording and reporting of history, the facts themselves never change. It's how we deal with those facts and how we analyze those facts that is important. There's good lessons to be learned from these books. As offensive as they may be, it tells us where we are and also helps us identify where we're at in 2016, 2017. Okay, enough of that. Let's go ahead and move on to our last segment, and we're going to examine the lives of slavery, the lives of slave children, excuse me. Now, I want you to listen closely to this audio clip. If you haven't done so, be sure to check out Voices of the Civil War. In that lesson, we utilize old recordings of survivors of the Civil War. We had an opportunity to hear from Confederate soldiers, Union soldiers, former slaves, and we're going to take a little bit of a cue from that lesson for our examination of the childhood of slave children. So with that much in mind, let me bring out George Smiley's recording. I know that I've got that around here somewhere. And let me get Laura Smalley out. We'll talk about her in just a moment. Here we go, George Johnson's interview. Now, if you haven't done so, I'll go ahead and bring this up as well. Voices from the Days of Slavery. This is the location where I was able to find these clips, and you can learn a little bit more about George Johnson. He's got a decent little bio there, and Laura Smalley. Not a lot of information on Laura, but you can find out a little more about her. So let's give this a listen, and I want you to think about that question. Well, did I lose my question? Now, it seems like I've managed to misplace my question, but just consider the question at hand. What kind of games does George Johnson have? Let me bump this up to the appropriate 250.
You say you an AME.
AME, don't see. Let me see. Name of woman. Head first. I know his name.
Just a second here. We'll be where we're at.
3 miles.
Again.
2 miles over there in lick place, understand? All that's on March 6th, understand? He's all that. And they come over there and near them quarters and they play all night. They play all night, just dance. We little boy. Yes.
Well, do you remember anything else they played aside from I lost my fiddle and lost my bow?
No, I got to think about it.
Well, did the children around the quarters have any games that they liked to play, that they sang to?
No, they always play ball and play marbles and play moon pig. See, it's nice, you understand? You can go and play moon pig, you understand? And playing marbles and playing baseball. They had no other games to play.
But little children didn't play any jumping games,
no,
singing games?
Nothing like that, no, sir. No, sir. Nothing like that. Then what we learn, you understand, we learn from children from Vicksburg. Children from Vicksburg come down excursion, you understand, train our children how to do things, you understand. They learn how to play croquet, something like that. They learn how to play a dominoes. The children left me out of the boy. The children from Vicksburg come down on the steamboat. They take our children, they all get in the gang down there, they're playing dominoes, playing croquet and something like that, you know.
They used to come on excursions from Vicksburg
Yes, sir.
to Davis's Bend.
The white people come down there in their hacks on the steamboat just to see the March Just plantation, you understand? They drive them.
Okay, folks, there we have it. George Johnson, born a slave, talking a little bit about the games he played as a child. And I thought this was really interesting because he immediately says, no, we played baseball and marbles. There weren't any jumping games, no jump rope, no hopscotch, anything like that. And I kind of figured that's what games would be about for slave children, because when you talk about baseball and marbles, it requires things. You have to have marbles. You have to have a ball. And considering the poverty of most slaves, it seemed like even these simple toys might be beyond the reach of them. So I was surprised to hear that, and to learn that, at least according to Mr. Johnson, that other games like croquet and dominoes. Okay, dominoes I can kind of see. If you go down to Louisiana, you go down to the South today, you're going to see dominoes remains a popular game amongst African Americans, many of which are the descendants of slaves. Croquet, not so much. I've never seen a gathering of African Americans playing croquet in my life, but apparently this was a game that Mr. Johnson enjoyed as a child. Now, for the next section, we're going to hear from Laura Smalley. Now, Laura is actually, I've tried to find clips of women who survived the Civil War, but they tend to be very difficult to find. There aren't many of them, and the few that are out there, the audio recording quality is so poor, and it doesn't really work out for what we have here. But I do want you just to listen to this clip. We aren't going to go through a lot of it, but I just want you to consider who, according to Mrs. Smalley, was expected to care for the slave children. Go ahead and play this. Give it a few minutes.
Tend to all the children. Just like, you bring a whole lot of children, and put them down, in one house. But if somebody have to look over them, and tend to them that way. Just a house full of little children. And if one act bad, they'd whoop him. They'd whoop him too, the old woman. And if the old woman didn't tend to the children, they'd whoop her too. To make her tend to the children, she wasn't doing nothing. Well, she wasn't a crippled woman like me, She wasn't no crippled woman satisfied. She wasn't no crippled woman like me. And they'd whoop her. And they had trays. I don't know where you see the tray. Wooden trays, dug out, all about that long. And all of them, would get around that tray with spoons and just eat. I like that because I ate out of the tray. With spoons, and eat, such as like mush or soup or something like that. Would feed them, before 12 o'clock. And all them children get around there and just eat out of there. And that old woman, she would tend to her. Her name Aunt Tishy. Yeah, I know it. Old woman, name Aunt Tishy. And
just like slopping hogs.
Just like a tray, just like a tray, you'd have. It's made just like a hog trough, And close, they'd wash them things and scald them out for the children. I didn't see them scald them, but that's what they told me, they'd scald them out, the children. And them children eat out of that thing, and just with spoon. If one reaches a spoon over in the other's hand, over in the other's plate, he gonna hit him. Hit him, knock that spoon back, on his side. And that's when we were children, wasn't able to tend to no other children. I had a brother, though. He could tend to children. And, just sit him down in a corner.
Reflections of Laura Smalley, of her childhood as a slave in the South, talking a little bit about how young children were cared for. And according to Mrs. Smalley, it wasn't a teenage girl, wasn't an elderly man, or their mother who offered the child care. It was an elderly woman who faced some pretty severe repercussions, namely a beating, if she was not taking care of the children as directed. Okay, folks, that about wraps it up for today's lesson. We hope you've enjoyed this. Don't forget that there's several other, we've got 2 other Civil War enrichment lessons for you to check out. We've got um, Voices of the Civil War, which we mentioned a little earlier, talking about the audio clips that we are enjoying right now. We also have Whitman's War, which examines the United States Civil War through the poetry of Walt Whitman. None of these lessons are designed to tell you about the details, the great people, the great events of the Civil War. What we are trying to do is to provide some more depth and detail that makes it a little more relevant to yourself. So whether you be an enthusiast of poetry, who finds access through the poems of Walt Whitman, or even something like the volunteer Thanksgiving that we read from our young folks. Perhaps you like more of a hands-on approach and really like getting into it and getting the war, getting the story from the people who survived it. Voices of the Civil War is a remarkable lesson for that ends. And again, it just scratches the surface of what's available out here, something like we've done today. We've just scratched the surface. We've told you the story of a couple of children soldiers, one from the Union, Edward Black, who was our drummer. We've talked about Edwin Jemison, whose photograph haunts us to this day. We've talked about the children of the home front and the media that they had access to. In the case of the Union children, they were reading our folks. In the case of the Southern children, at least those who could have access to the material, we're looking at the geographic reader for Dixie Children, or perhaps the Confederate spelling book, and definitely seem inappropriate for children, at least from our perspective. And then we wrapped it up with some explanations of life as a slave child from both George Johnson, who talked about playing a surprising variety of games, at least not what I would expect an impoverished slave child to be playing. We also heard from Laura Smalley, who talked a little bit about the rearing of very young children. Again, this is just scratching the surface, folks. If you want to learn more, be sure to check out these web links. There's a couple that I did not open for you. Children of the Civil War from civilwar.org. If you click on that and click open, browse to rather, you're going to find a lot of great resources, a lot of great articles. I think that's about the only one that I did not open. But if you have questions or comments, if you need assistance with a project, just get in touch with me. It's jsipe@sipesociety.com. Don't forget, we do have U.S. History 1. That'll be opening up in the next few days for those of you who are looking to take a full service course that is going to tell you everything you need to know about American history. That'll be opening up very soon. Lastly, let me go ahead and open this up one more time. If you haven't done so, be sure to sign up for the Sipe Society mailing list. This is how we pass along free resources like today's mini lesson, the homeschool guide to social studies. Up next on my list, looks like we're going to be doing some flashcards on early American history. If you've got ideas that you'd like me to put together, just send that to me and be in touch. It's been a blast, folks. Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you learned a lot. And as always, I'm Mr. Sipe, and I'll see you on the computer.